computer. Let everybody in. Share screen. Studio. All right, everybody online can hear me and see me. Yeah, see the screen shared. All right, so homework for today was to effectively get this calculator part set up, right? We're supposed to be able to dial in some number of things. I think for right now, if you press a 0, this becomes a 0. Press a 1, it becomes a 1, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish writing that. First, I'm going to show you a little bit of a shortcut for writing it. Just keep adding to our learning here. So what I wrote last time is I wrote, this quantity button pressed, V is whatever button was passed in. So I'm asking the question, well, if it was the 1 button, set it to a 1. If it was the 2 button, set it to a 2, 3 button, so on and so forth, right? So most of you had that kind of approach in your code where you just had this wall of if statements. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and create a button B is equal to the button version of V, since I know that's a button. And then I'll go ahead and say this dot quantity TV dot set text equal to B dot get text. Grab the button, set the text equal to whatever text is on the button. Make sense? I don't have to ask which button it is. The button has the right text on it. So I'll go ahead and relaunch. Oh, actually, I need to hook up the other buttons. I don't think I have them on the on click yet. Let's go do that. So there's so I set all of those buttons up. Oh, maybe I did already have it set up for those. Looks like I did. So now it's working for all my different buttons. That makes some sense. All right, so this is probably the more desirable solution to the homework, but certainly I expected everybody to have the wall of if statements, but this is handy for us. Are we going ahead and... Oh, now actually what's interesting here is notice that before I had to hook up the 1 button in here, but now I don't need to know about all those buttons, right? I just need to know that some button called this function, and I want to set my number equal to whatever the text was on that button. So I no longer need to know about all of these guys. All right. Now, realistically speaking, so I'll disconnect that. I'm going to go ahead and initially set my quantity TV to nothing. So it's empty. So I'll say this dot quantity TV set text to the empty string, even though we have it mimicked in here to say a 4, just so we can kind of see what our user interface is supposed to look like. I'm going to go ahead and programmatically set it to nothing. Let me just show you what that'll ultimately do. So even though we see a 4 on here, when I go to run it, it turns into nothing. All right. And then when I start putting stuff in, it starts filling it up. Now, We might want to, though, have it where I can say like 12 D6, right? Instead of just a single number. So I want this clear button to go ahead and clear it out, but I want to build up my number as we go. All right. So the way we might accomplish that, so I'm going to go back into my code, and in main activity, I'm going to have a variable up top here. This will be a string, and we'll say current quantity text. And inside of my onCreate, I'll go ahead and say this dot current quantity text will start off as the empty string. And then when we hit the button, we're going to go ahead and say this dot current quantity text plus equals b dot get text. And then we're going to set this guy to this dot current quantity text. So we'll just keep concatenating onto our string the next number, and then set the text view's value to whatever's in that string. That make sense? So now when I run this guy, I can say 78 or 785 D6 in this case. All right, but we do want this clear button to work. All right, now what do we want the clear button to do? We want the clear button to probably zero out our current quantity text, and then zero out the label as well. So why don't we go ahead and create another function here, public void clear button pressed. And this guy will go ahead and set this dot current quantity text equal to the empty string. And then we'll go ahead and reset that guy to the empty string. So now we need to go teach our clear button to call this function. So we'll go back out here, click on our clear button. Inside of onCreate, or onClick rather, we're going to select the clear button pressed. That's what we want to have happen when we do that. Go ahead and run this guy again. So now I can do like 784, that I can change my mind and zero back out, that I can say 25, so on and so forth. What if I hit a 0? Technically, that's the correct number, but it's weird, right? So might we want to have it where we can't start with a 0? That might be a nice thing, so people can't put in weird numbers, even though it probably would still work fine. So basically, if they hit 0 and the current quantity text is the empty string, just ignore it. Don't let them start a number with a 0. Make some sense? So we'll write some logic for that. We're asking a question. We want to keep this coming back to that original, how do human beings solve problems? Remember stuff, ask questions, repetition. So now we're going to ask a question. If the current quantity text has nothing in it, and the thing you just clicked on has a 0, do nothing. How might we ask that question? Let's pose that to the class. So I'm in here, some button was just clicked to come in here. First of all, how do I ask the question, is the current quantity text equal to the empty string? Give me two different ways of asking that question. If there's nothing in current quantity text. Current quantity text is just a string. Nothing Android crazy or anything here. Plain Jane string, just like we've been doing all semester. How do I ask a question? Is a string, does this string have nothing in it? Is it either the empty string? What are two different ways I could ask, is a string empty? I'll take one of the ways first. Go ahead. Okay, and how do I do that? How do I check to see if there's characters within the string? Okay, tell me more. I want to know specifically what I should type here. How many characters are in current quantity text? Is there any way I can ask a string to report the number of characters it currently has in it? Okay, for strings, it's the length method, right? Instead of size, it's length. So I say, if the length of that guy is equal to 0, that means there's nothing in it, right? Similarly, I could also ask the question, if that guy dot equals the empty string, is this string equivalent to the empty string? Make sense? Everybody in here should have known how to do that. So I'm hoping that most of you were just keeping quiet. Okay, this isn't new stuff. How do you say, is a string empty? All right. So I'm going to go with length. If its length is currently 0, and how do I ask if the button that was clicked has text on it that is equal to a 0? Kind of just gave you a hint on the second example of how do I check to see if a string is equal to another string. This dot, actually not this dot, it's just b dot get text dot equals a 0. If that's true. So if, and I'll actually keep it all on one line because I think it's a little bit easier to read here. If my current string's length is 0 and the text is equal to a 0, that means I don't want to go ahead and I don't want to add anything to my string, right? I don't want anything to change. How do I make a method immediately end? What keyword immediately stops a method, immediately stops a function? Go ahead. It's in that same category. Break will get me out of a loop, right? If I'm currently going through a loop and I break out of that loop, that'll break me out of that running loop. How do I break out of a function? How do I make a function immediately end? Anybody online? Long weekend. Return. Return makes the function end. All right, this guy has a return type of void, so I'm not allowed to return an actual value, but I can call return, which will kill the function. So if there's nothing in that string and you just click the 0 button, let's just get out of Dodge. That's what we're saying there. Now, you could have similarly said, only do this stuff if this guy was not a 0 or something like that. You could have written the alternative, but instead I wrote this as, hey, look, let's catch the special case that we want to avoid and say, look, if there's nothing in that string and you just click the 0, we're not going to let you start numbers off with zeros. So what do? We do nothing. We're just going to get out of there. And return makes a function immediately end. So we will not get to these lines. All right. It's no different than return in Python. Return makes a function, or object-oriented languages, we usually call them methods. They're effectively synonyms. It makes it immediately end. All right. So now I've added this little code. It should keep us from detecting, well, it should keep us from starting a number off with 0. So I come in here and I click 0 a bunch of times, there's nothing. But now I can go in and does the 0 button still work? Yes, it does. Still works. I just wasn't allowed to start my number with a 0. All right, that makes some sense. All right, so now the next thing that we want to be able to change is we probably want these buttons here to do something, right? Update this D6. So D4 is this one, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20. Have it update whatever the dice we're rolling is. Okay, so let's go ahead and update those buttons. Now this one's a little bit more, I guess a little bit sketchier. Let's look at how we've designed these on here. So what do we call this? Do we call this like D4? So this is D4B, D6B, D8B, D10B, D12B, D20B. So how might you suggest that we set this text view equal to everything but the B portion of the name on this button? Do you think we can go through and get everything in a string except the last character? Because I do, if I look at this D4, the name of this guy is D4B. That's his ID. He doesn't have any text on there, but he has a name. Now let me actually show you this. So if we come in here, we're going to create a public void dice button pressed. This guy will take a view V as a parameter. And I'm actually, for right now, I'm already getting the, well, let's just cheat with the quantity TV. So I'll go ahead and say this dot quantity TV dot set text. I'm just giving us the ability to output something to the screen somewhere. There is a way of putting it to the console, but it's kind of less friendly. You got to go and hunt for stuff down here inside of what's called logcat. So, I mean, I can do a system.out.println and have something show up at the log if I want to just see what the output is. I'll even show you that here. So I can say system.out.println v dot, what's it, get ID? I don't want to see get. Can I get its name? ID is going to get me, so it's not going to actually get me the text from it. Well, I'll show you what it gets you anyways. This is going to get you some unique integer. Now, just for the sake of argument here, I'm going to put 5 little asterisks before that guy, and you'll see why here in a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click on logcat here, which will open it up. So first of all, we're seeing that there's a bunch of crap that gets outputted here. So what I'm going to do, I'll go and open this up. Actually, hold on, I need to hook those up. So I'm going to click on all of my buttons here. And then I'll set the on click for these guys to dice button pressed. And then we'll go ahead and restart this. Okay, now Logcat is showing you the log file of what's happening behind the scenes for this application. You know, memory being allocated, stuff like that. A lot of stuff that, hey, it's not unimportant, but probably not something that's going to be very easy for us to look through. So if I start clicking on these things, you see we got a number there. We got a different number there, different number, different number, different number, different number. We actually kind of lucked out that we were able to find them on there. What I usually do, this is more of like a rule of thumb. I usually start it off with something like a bunch of asterisks. That way up here, I can just put some asterisks up there and it only shows me the stuff that I wanted to see as output, because I really don't care about all that other junk that was all over the screen, right? Okay, go ahead. Yeah, if you're trying to do like some debugging, like if you have a big application and you don't want to necessarily take over some text view, I mean, I was going to kind of hack this, right? I was going to come into my code. Let's just show like maybe the easy way of doing this. I was going to say, look, I just want to know what this guy is. So I can go ahead and say, well, I'll just use my quantity text view real quick. I'll set its text equal to v.getID. Even though that's not the actual use for that label, this is a nice, quick and dirty way of getting that number, and I can get it on my interface real quick, so I don't have to go and hunt through this, okay? So this kind of goes back to like 175. The idea is that we're problem solvers, right? Here's the application I'm working with. I have a bunch of crap laying in front of me, Legos, text views are one of my Legos. I can put some text on it. I just kind of want to know what this guy says if I want to know this number. So I'll just quickly hijack that guy. So now when I click on one of these, it'll set that text view equal to that value. So I can kind of see the kind of value I'm dealing with there. So now the ID for a button is the unique identifier. And this is associated with, if I say r.id.d4 button, you see how it's given me, actually, that's not the number I was expecting. This is giving it to me in a different, I wonder if that's the hexadecimal value of it. So I kind of actually expected it to give me the same number we were seeing as output there. Yeah, but regardless, this isn't text that's going to help me, right? But I'm going to go out here to this, and let's set the text for these guys. I think if I set this text, it won't show up. I won't see it through the image. The image will be the major portion of this. So for my D4, that's his ID. Where is... Oh, actually, this would be better. So we have a thing called tag. So tag effectively allows me to label something. So let's just do this for D4 real quick. I'm going to tag that D4 guy as D4. It's not putting any sort of text on this or anything. But now what I can do is if I go back to the code and I set this guy equal to get tag for V. I think that gave me a string, right? Gave me an object which has a toString, so it'll be a string. I hit D4. See how it shows me D4 now, but a D6 doesn't have a tag associated with it. So this allows me to associate something with a button. It'll actually be on, I'm guessing it's going to be on almost any thing that's a view. You can set a tag for anything that's a view in Android. Now, the reality is that that's the first time I ever came across tag for Android as far as I remember. So how do I know that's what tags are used for? Do you think that different technologies probably take hints from each other and kind of the best practices for doing things? Well, I've done a lot of stuff with game development using Unity. And at some point, we'll start doing some of that stuff, maybe even in the 300 class. But I'll throw game development stuff in there. It's not dissimilar to all this other junk that we're doing. But the way you can flag things in there is you can set a tag for objects, and that gives you a way of like labeling it without anybody seeing it, but you can still ask questions about it. Because you might want to say, hey, you know, these, maybe you have asteroids in a game. And when an asteroid collides with your spaceship, different things happen than when I don't know, air bubble collides with your spaceship. So you can tag all your asteroids as type asteroid, and you can tag your air bubbles as air bubbles, and you can say only collisions associated with asteroids do I care about. Something like that, or at least differentiate. Asteroids make ship blow up, air bubbles give us a shield or something like that. You know, whatever might make sense for the game. All right, so there's a little hack we can do. We can set up the tag for all these guys equal to something useful. So I set D4. I'm actually going to capitalize it just to match what we were trying to do before. So that's a D4. This is a D6. This is a D8. This is a D10. This is a D12. This is a D20. All right, so now I have all those buttons set up. And what I want to do is I want to set this label right here. What did I call this guy? Selected die TV. I want to set it equal to whatever the tag is for the button that was selected. So we need to now, again, this is MVC. We have to go make sure we have access to that selected tag, selected die TV. Okay, so I have not given myself access yet. So I'll create a private text view. Selected die TV. I can name the variable whatever I want, but I might as well name it something related to the thing I'm going to connect it to, right? I want to have this variable connected to a widget that lives in my interface. I'll make that connection right here. I'll say this dot selected die TV is equal to this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot selected die TV. So that's MVC in action. I've made my code-based variable connected to a physical widget in that world with that one line of code. I ask the current activity to go and find the ID associated with that text view and link it to this local variable so I can do stuff with it. All right. So now inside here for our dice button pressed, we'll go ahead and say this dot selected die TV set text equal to v dot get tag. It's probably going to be dot toString, because get tag is going to be an object. Set text wants something of type string. It actually probably wants something of type editable is my guess. This dot set text wants something of type char sequence, and a string is a char sequence. The tag gives me an object. I'm telling it to give me that object's string version. All right, so this will set the text equal to whatever the tag's text is. Go ahead and run this again. So now it's a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, a D12, a D20, and then we can do something like this, 25. And the idea would be then we can hit roll and it's going to do something awesome and go make zillions of dollars, right? All right. So next thing we want to do is, now that we have it giving us the ability to dial in things like this, we want to go ahead and write this roll button. So when we click the roll button, what do we want to do? Well, we want to do whatever. We want to roll this many of these guys. And we want to collect our answer two different ways. We want to have a collection of all the individual rolls. And then we also want to have a sum of the rolls. Make sense? So what kind of collection could we use if we know exactly how many rolls we're going to be doing? Do we have any sort of collection type in Java or any other programming language in general that allows us to hold a number of elements if we know exactly how many there are? Go ahead. An array. Okay, arrays are perfect for this. I know how big it's going to be. It's going to be that big. Now, our only little challenge here is when we get the text from this, it's going to come out as a string. I need to convert that string into an integer. All right, then I have an actual number that I can use to create my array. So let's go write the function. We want to have a function that gets called when this guy is clicked. So we're going to go ahead and write the function and then set rolls on click equal to that function. So we'll say public void on roll button pressed. And again, you can name this whatever you want. I'm just naming my function something that is meaningful to what they do. When do I want this function to get called? When the roll button's pressed. That's why I named him on roll button pressed, okay? As opposed to LOL elephant woot, where that would still work. It just isn't that meaningful to us when we go and look at the code. All right, so now before I forget, since I tend to forget to do this part, let's go and hook it up, okay? So I've created the function, it's got the right signature. I can now come over here, I'll click on the roll button. I'll go to his on click. And here is the on roll button pressed. All right, so now that's hooked up. So we want to go ahead and get a couple of values out of this. And I'm going to do it in two steps just so we can kind of see what's happening. So I'm going to say string quantity string is equal to this dot quantity TV get text. And actually, it's going to say this guy's coming out as a character sequence. He's actually a string. So I'm just going to say toString. That's a pretty common thing that you have to do in Android because technically character sequences are like a more generic type. I'm putting it into a string. It already has a toString function because all objects in Java have a toString function. So I can just say, look, give me the string representation of yourself, which is a string, and now I can do whatever I want with it. Okay, so now this guy is a string. I want to get the quantity int out of that. How do I convert a string representation of a number into an integer representation of that number? Pretty sure we've done this. If I have a string, like the number 127, how do I turn that into the int 127? Is there a tool that I have somewhere in my code that we've seen before that allows me to do that? Integer.parseInt, right? So I ran to Home Depot, I went and got something off the shelf, and this is like this little machine. If I drop a string into the top of it, out pops an int, presuming that string had an int in it, okay? So I'm going to say integer.parseInt of my quantity string. I didn't have to do this in 2 lines. I could have done it in a single line, but 2 lines really drives home this idea that it came out as a string. Now I need it as an int, right? Now I have the integer that tells me how big my array needs to be. So I'll say I'll have an int array. Maybe I'll call this guy the rolls. And this guy will be equal to a new int array of size quantity int. That's how big that array is going to be. All right, now I want to roll a whole bunch of random numbers. So I'm probably going to need a random number generator. Okay, so we're going to use our random class to do that. So I'll go ahead and create a random R is equal to a new random. And it probably, well, it didn't import it for me, but you can hover over this guy and then you can just click down on import class. And now it automatically imported it for me at the top here. There's my, where is it? Oh, right here. Okay, Eclipse just did it for you. So first world problems, I guess. All right, so we have a random number generator here, and we want to go ahead and we want to roll our dice some number of times. Well, how many sides is the current dice? Well, inside of our selected die TV, we're going to have a string that looks like D4 or D6 or D8 or D10. So I have a string in there that has, it contains the information I want, but it also contains an extra character that I don't really want. It just so happens, though, that extra character always lives at bucket 0. Okay? So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say, I'm going to do this again in 2 steps. In fact, let me put some labels here, or some comments rather. So let's say get the quantity as an int. That's what we're accomplishing there. And this next part is get the number of sides as an int. So I'll go ahead and say string full dice string is going to be equal to this dot current quantity text dot toString. Actually, sorry, dot get. Oh no, it actually is a string already, isn't it? Current quantity text is a string. Oh, but that's the wrong thing. I want selected die. I want to know which die was selected. This dot selected die TV dot get text dot toString. So this will be like D4 or D6, something like that. That's the kind of value that will live inside that string right now. Make sense? Then I'm going to create another string trimmed dice string. Now, do you have a suggestion on how we could take a string that looks like this and get just the 4 as a string? Let's not convert it to an int yet. We've already seen how to convert it to an int. There is a shortcut way of doing this, but let's assume you don't know the shortcut way. Could we write a function that takes something in that looks like D4? So can I have a private string extract number of sides that takes a string dice type as a parameter? And this guy might take something that looks like D4 and returns a 4. That's what I ultimately wanted to do. So take a couple minutes, try to write that function. Don't worry about don't worry about anything else. You are writing figure this as a quiz or a test or something like that. On that test, I said, given a string that looks like this, write a function that will extract just the 4 from it. Similarly, if it was a D20, it should boil down to a 20, like that. Make sense? So we're writing a function that will manipulate this string. So take a couple minutes, try to write the logic for that. Do it on a piece of paper, and I'm not having you submit it, but just spend some time practicing that. All right, so let's take a look here. Should be a pretty straightforward little function. So maybe we'll have an answer is equal to the empty string. We want everything but bucket 0. So for int I is equal to 1, I is less than dice type dot length, I plus plus, answer plus equals dice type dot char at I, return answer. Something like that. We're building up a new string. We're going to start at bucket 1 of dice type, go all the way to the end of dice type, and pick up the, so bucket 1 is here, so we'll pick up just the 4. If we were dealing with a D20, we'll pick up bucket 1 and bucket 2. Concatenate that on to answer, return answer ultimately. So now I can call this dot extract number of sides from full dice string, and that will give me that trimmed value. Similarly, I could have said trimmed dice string is equal to full dice string dot substring 1. And that will give me the substring of full dice string starting at bucket 1 to the end. So we already have a tool called substring that lets us get portions of a string. But it doesn't matter if you didn't know that. This wasn't like the end of the world type function, was it? So if you need to do something kind of quick and dirty, especially with string manipulation, especially with Java, that's a string-based language, going ahead and just manipulating a string real quick, just write a function that does it. Don't hit Google for 25 minutes looking for the perfect tool when you could have just written the thing. All right, so now I have that number of sides, but now we want it as an int, right? So int, we'll call this number of sides int. This will be integer dot parseInt, and this is going to be trimmed dice string. That'll give it to me as a number. So now I want to roll the dice quantity int number of times and store each roll in a different bucket of my array. And I'll go ahead and give you the, we'll say int array. Oh, I already did it, called the rolls. Different bucket of the rolls, and set our text view on the interface for the individual roles appropriately, as well as keep a running total of the, I'll just say running total, and set that text view appropriately as well. All right, so for your homework, you're going to finish this and and connect in the right text views and things like that, so that when we come out to our code here, or come out to our interface, and I say I want to do 9D4, and I hit roll, I should get 9 different D4 rolls up here. and then get the sum of all those roles right here. Make sense? So I'll go ahead and I'll commit this. I'll do a commit and push. Commit and push. Push. So you have the current version of my code. And I'll go ahead and create a slide here for the homework. Finish writing the on roll button clicked function such that it updates the appropriate text views on the user interface with the correct quantity and total sum of all the roles. Submit a GitHub link as well as self-eval. All right, questions about what I'm asking you to do? All right, I'll see everybody on Wednesday. We do not have class Friday, correct? Good Friday before Easter. So of course I'll give you an impossible homework assignment over Easter. Do a good job on this assignment, and I may consider not giving you homework over Easter.